Last year, I published my top 10 family board games, and at the end of that video, I invited viewers to leave comments recommending their favorite family board games for consideration in next year's list. And true to my word, I got busy, I did my research, and I checked out all of them. So today, I'm going to share with you the best viewer-recommended family board games and a few of my thoughts as I piece together my top 10 for 2022. Now, believe it or not, I do have limited space back there, and also, this is a totally independent channel, self-funded, so I'm very careful about what games I buy. I don't exactly have publishers sending me games for free yet. I'm very careful about which ones I pick. I'll look at the rulebook and I'll read through it and I'll try to understand how the game is played, and from there I'll make a call of whether or not it's a game I should add to my collection. That being said, the games that I took a look at fall into three categories. The first category is games that just aren't worth mentioning. I'm not really into dexterity games, and I find they really frustrate the young ones. Any games that are out of print or not available for purchase, I don't mention those. There are several games that were listed that might be fun for some people's families, but I don't really think of as age appropriate for all children, so I'm just going to leave those games off, and maybe what I'll do is I'll write some thoughts in the description just so that for those of you who did mention a game, you can check out to see what I've written below, and I'll share a little bit of my thoughts on it. But for the video, I'm just going to leave those out. The next category are games that I think are worth taking a look at, but not necessarily games that I've bought yet. These are games that I might need to actually play to get a sense of how they go. And to be honest, it's one of the reasons I'm making this video, so that I can kind of open a discussion with my viewers and say, hey, what do you think about these other games that I haven't tried yet? Are they worth looking at? And maybe if there's a strong enough recommendation, I'll take a closer look before I put together my top 10. And then finally, there's the category of games that as soon as I looked at them, I knew for sure that I was going to buy them. They are very attractive. They fulfill all of the criteria of what I look for in a family board game, and they are my strongest recommendation, at least at this moment, until I've considered some of the discussion that I'm sure will ensue after I post this video. Before we get started, I'm very excited to announce an exciting new feature on theperfectboardgame.com. It is now possible to subscribe to price alerts to family board games, or any type of board game, in fact. As of right now, the feature is new, so the sign up is very prominent, but if you don't see it there in the future, go ahead and check the menu up above, where you might also see the shop link where you can buy, of course, this incredible hand-drawn board game t-shirt featuring over 100 board games. But mostly, it supports me so I can buy more board games and talk about them on video. All right. First category, which is actually the second category. The first category is games not worth mentioning, which we won't mention. Second category is games worth considering. There are 12 games in this category, so to make sure this video doesn't last forever, I sort of have to go through them a little bit quickly, but if any of them become finalists, I'll be sure to go into it more in depth in the top 10 family games of 2022, which I will leave a card for or a link for. Go ahead and check that out. The first game in the list is Juicy Fruits, which is a very colorful and very fun looking game. And it looks a bit like it might feel sort of like Calico. The scoring is very abstract, but as you fill ships with fruit, you make more room in your island to collect more fruit and score more points. That game is Juicy Fruits. The next game is Dragonwood, which didn't really impress me at all, but it did seem very age appropriate and has very little math skills involved. Maybe this is more of a game where parents are playing for the sake of the kids rather than playing with the kids. You're basically rolling dice to collect cards. Then we have a game that is very popular, and I had definitely heard of this game before, but because it involves dice, I was never really interested in playing it. The game is Roll For It. Now, the reason it gets the worth mentioning but not highly worth mentioning is because I think I found a game that I like much better than Roll For It. Also, Roll For It doesn't have a theme. You're just competing to roll dice in order to claim cards where each card has dice conditions on it. But a lot of people have had a lot of fun with this game. The next game is called Ecosystem. Now, Ecosystem was not actually recommended. Habitats was recommended, and I could not find Habitats. I think it's out of print. But Ecosystem is produced by a company called Genius Games, and in this game you are placing, or you're drafting cards to place them in a grid, and all of the cards have something to do with an ecosystem. So there are stream cards and bear cards and rabbit cards, and each of the cards has different, or tiles I guess, has different scoring mechanisms. Like the river scores points if it's alongside more rivers, and the bear scores points based on what it's next to inside the grid. But what I really like about Genius Games, if you take a look at them, all of their games are very educational and very gamey. They have like games about cellular biology and some really cool stuff from this company. I think I'm more excited about the production company even than I am about the game ecosystem. The next game is a game that people have said over and over and over again. And at first I thought I had never played it before, but it turns out I had played it a very long time ago. I did not like it, but it's popular with viewers, which is the purpose of this video. The game is Cockroach Poker. Now, my description of Cockroach Poker is it's basically BS, where you're playing a card and you're saying, I'm playing 3 queens, and someone says, that's BS, and you flip it over and it's 3 queens, and they were wrong, so you get a point and they lose a point and whatever. It's just that, except instead of playing queens and sevens and stuff, you're playing cockroaches and rats and worms and stuff. Can you tell I'm not impressed by it? It's a game that you can play with a standard deck of cards. So it's not a game that I would ever buy, because I'll just use a standard deck of cards if I want to play BS. But anyway, Cockroach Poker, cuter theme, really popular with the viewers. Man, I am so sarcastic right now, and I apologize. I promise I'll be more optimistic about the other games. The next game is a game that's actually quite old. It's a trick-taking game, and I have never even heard of it before. It's called The Bottle Imp, and in this trick-taking game, trump is determined not by a suit, but by a value. And as people take tricks, the Bottle Imp keeps being passed around, and that helps determine what trump is for the hand. And then the person who's left with the Bottle Imp at the end of the game loses points, and everybody else scores points based on how many tricks they've taken. Sounds really interesting to me, but trick-taking games aren't really things that I think I would play with my kids. The next game is Skirmish. Now, Skirmish has its own deck, which you can buy, but I do think that the deck is analogous to a standard deck of cards, except instead of suits, you have like knives and axes and, weapons, I guess. But what I like about the game, even though it's basically just a card game, is it plays a lot like the trading card game Android Netrunner. And what players are trying to do is attack each other and hide their most valuable cards in different stacks. The next game is Keys to the Castle. And it kind of reminds me a little of Zombie Kids, although you're not attacking any zombies. It's got a maze element to it. The way you set it up is you have several cards laid out in a grid, and each player is on a different side of the grid, and the objective is to get to the other side of the grid. So you're trying to cut your own path across while simultaneously making it hard for your opponents to cut across the grid. The next game looks really exciting, but thematically, I don't think it's something that would interest my kids. It might interest other people's kids, though, which is definitely why it needs to be on this list. The game is Overboss, and it kind of has a retro 80s video game feel to it. The objective is to make a boss dungeon that has the most victory points. And it's a tile drafting and placing game. Every tile you're placing gets a monster that you're putting on it, and then there's just lots of ways to score. So you've got scoring for the kinds of monsters and what kinds of tiles they're on, and then you get points for the tiles themselves and how they're arranged inside of the dungeon. The next game is a game that I eventually found, but it was very difficult. It seems to be based out of England, I guess. But the game is called Astronauts, and I know very little about it, actually. But from what I can tell, it's also called the Ultimate Space Adventure Game. You are playing cards to go on a space adventure, and so you're going to these different planets. And the more cards you play, the farther out in space you go. But you don't get the points unless you can roll dice to make it home safely. So there's a bit of a press your luck aspect to the game, but then the cards you're playing also give you modifications for your die roll, which can be very interesting. So it sounds like a really simple and fun space exploration game for kids, but again, it was like $20 to import it to the United States, and I kind of thought, well, I don't know if it's really worth it. I got 2 more games in this category. Honestly, these games could very easily be in the next category. I just haven't bought them yet, but I saved them for last because I think they're the coolest. The first game is called Boomerang, and Boomerang is a lot like Sushi Go, a card drafting game where players are passing the cards to each other. But whereas Sushi Go, you simply score points based on the cards you've collected, in Boomerang there's a map of Australia, and you're getting points for the areas of Australia that you visit. And of course, you visit those areas by having the cards for it. Also, it has a really neat scoring idea, which is betting on the cards that are going to come back to you after the cards have gone around the circle. So you score points on your first and your last card. And that's interesting because most of the time in a game like Sushi Go, the last card is the least valuable card and has very little impact on your scoring. But in Boomerang, it actually has a really big impact on your scoring. And then finally, there's One Key. I was really excited to hear about One Key because I recently played a game on Board Game Arena, which you can try for free, called Similo, which I didn't like because I saw a flaw in it, but then One Key fixes that flaw. So what's the whole idea? The idea of the game is one player is trying to communicate to the other players a secret key, and that key is a picture. And there are several pictures laid in front of the players to consider, but only one player knows which picture is the secret key. And the way they communicate to the other players is by playing cards and describing whether or not the card they play has something in common with or unlike the hidden key. And players have to figure out, okay, well, which cards must be eliminated. And every round, more and more cards are being eliminated until at the very end, the sole remaining card has to be the key. And if so, it's a cooperative game and all players get a victory point, or they win collectively. Lastly, the games that have really impressed me and that I've already purchased. So first, I better talk about the game that I think is better than Roll for it. The game is Rescue Animals. This game, it looks like it's independently published. It's very simple artwork and very simple gameplay too. The objective is to rescue animals, and you do that by rolling dice. So during the game, all players are rolling their dice simultaneously, and then like Yahtzee or something, if they have dice they want to set aside, they can set those aside and keep rolling their other dice. And then as soon as they have the conditions to rescue an animal, they shout "rescuing," and then they claim the animal card, and play continues with the other players competing for the remaining animals. You just keep doing that round after round after round. Now, that sounded really simple to me, and I would not have bought that game. But when I was looking at it on Amazon, as I said, is my first step, and my wife saw the cover artwork, she was like, we should buy that game. And I usually don't pass up an opportunity when my wife encourages me to buy a game. So I put it in the cart. I read the rulebook and I thought, oh gosh, this game's kind of dumb. But we played it. Holy cow. My kids love it so much. My wife loves it so much. The next game is called Mountain Goats. Mountain Goats happens to be another dice rolling game. And as players roll their dice, they're creating sums. And that resulting sum allows them to move their goat up the mountain. Once a goat gets to the top of a mountain, it can accrue victory points. But once another goat gets to the top of the mountain, it kicks that goat off. And so there's a little bit of a conflict of, do I want to move up this mountain over here and get my victory points once I get to the top? Or do I want to put my dice together another combination so that I can go up this mountain and kick my opponent off because they're over there making too many points and I don't like that. I want to kick them off. So you're kicking goats off mountains and you're trying to dominate your own mountains. It's a really, really fun objective for a dice rolling game. Mountain Goats. Now the next game won the Spiel des Jahres in 2018, and I don't know if I say that right. Spiel des Jahres, the game of the year in 2018. And it's called Luxor. In the game, players move through a Egyptian temple by playing cards from their hand. So we've got cards. And what's interesting is that you cannot rearrange the cards. And when you play, you can only play the far left card or the far right card. So if I play my far right card, it leaves me 4 cards. When I draw one from the deck, it has to go in the middle again. And you're planning a few moves ahead. As you move through the temple, you're collecting different treasures in order to, get your victory points. Of course, it's a victory point scoring game. And you can collect more treasures along the way, but in the center of the temple is like the most prized treasure of all. So you have to kind of decide on your strategy. Are you going to move through the temple as fast as you can in order to get to the best treasure in the center? Or are you going to take your time and try to collect smaller treasures, but treasures that will add up as you move through? We've played it a couple of times, and everyone in the family has really enjoyed it. But it is a turn-taking game. It's not one of these players playing simultaneous games, and so it can go a little bit longer. The next game reminds me of one of my favorite games ever. One of my favorite games ever is Santorini. Now, Santorini is an abstract strategic game that would be way too hard for my young kids to be able to compete with the older kids or adults in the family. So I can't play Santorini with my children, but this game I can play, and it kind of has a similar feel to it. It's, hey, that's my fish. And in hey, that's my fish, on your turn, you can move one of your penguins in a straight line and then remove one of the pieces of ice on the iceberg that you're all floating on. Now, the ice has fish in it, and the fish are victory points. So taking ice off the iceberg means victory points for you, but it also reduces the area with which there is to move. And then finally, saving the best for last, is my favorite discovery so far, the game Explorers. Like many of my top favorite family games, Explorers is a game where all players are playing at the same time. What's happening is everyone has their own map. And every map is a grid of little terrain spaces, grasslands and mountains and deserts and water and so on. And the objective is to move across the map and get points by getting to special tiles. So one player flips over a card, and then there are 2 terrain types, and every other player chooses which one they want to use to explore. They do this by using a little dry erase marker and marking off spaces, and then the next player flips over a card and everybody does it again. So you're crossing off spaces and crossing off spaces, and then at the end of the round, everybody tallies up their points, and you have 3 more rounds, and then that's the whole game. Really simple gameplay. Continually, you're active, which is great. I love how easy and addictive it is to make the decision of which direction you want to explore. And I think that really lends itself well to the theme of the game. And that is probably the best game that I've found so far. But I'm going to leave it open for discussion this time. Which of the ones that I've mentioned are your favorite family board game? Or, I'll change the question, is there something new that's recently come out that I don't know about yet? I would love to know. I'd love to know your thoughts as well. I haven't made my top 10 list yet. The comment section is open. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you can get alerts when games drop in price. You do that by going to theperfectboardgame.com and then entering your email address. Make sure you verify your email address because you'll get an email to ask you to verify. And if you do, you'll be able to take advantage of excellent deals up to once a day, like I do, and save yourself some money. Thank you. And I hope to see you next time. Take care.